Most people don't follow the legislative session in Indianapolis, but its decisions affect every business in Indiana. Today, we're going behind the scenes at the Indiana Statehouse. Welcome to the Aspire Johnson County podcast, the Johnson County Business Insider, where you'll hear storytelling and interviews spotlighting the people, projects, and policies driving Johnson County, Indiana's growth. From this, you'll gain insights into business, workforce, public policy, and community development all around Johnson County, Indiana. We're excited to share that the Johnson County Business Insider podcast is presented in 2016 by Citizens Bank.
This podcast is brought to you by Citizens Bank. Citizens Bank, serving South Central Indiana since 1931. Building strong communities one relationship at a time. Learn more at citizens-banking.com.
This episode is also supported in part by Community Hospital South.
Community Health Network cares, offering primary and specialty care locations across the South Side. Find the care you need close to home at ecommunity.com/south. Community Health Network provides many advanced treatment options for our Southside neighbors. Feel confident in your care, from minimally invasive surgeries to specialized cardiac care. Learn more at ecommunity.com/south.
Today, I'm sitting down with Caryl Auslander, lobbyist and principal at public policy firm Torchbearer Public Affairs. I'm your host, Christian Maslowski, president and CEO at Aspire Johnson County. Caryl, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we dive into policy and the Statehouse, tell our listeners a little bit more about you. What's your role at Torchbearer Public Affairs and the type of work you do for your clients?
Sure. So I founded Torchbearer Public Affairs almost 8 years ago, but I've been working in and around government affairs for 26 years now. So I was 4 years old when I first started, but I've always spent my entire career working around policy and politics. It's something I'm very passionate about. I started this firm 8 years ago. I serve as the founder and managing principal. We have a staff of 3 full-time employees, 2 part-time, and we represent a number of clients all around the state on a number of different issues. So we're multi-issue, multi-client.
So I have to ask, why did you become a lobbyist?
That's a great question. I started working at the Statehouse and on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and was really happy working in policy behind the scenes. And I got a job offer. I was recruited away from Senator Lugar's office to go work for a lobby firm. And I thought, well, it provided more money. So I thought I would give it a shot and see if I liked it. And I never left.
Good. All right. Well, before we get into our chat, let's demystify what it is you do for your clients. You know, when people hear the word lobbyist, all kinds of images and assumptions come to mind. You know, they probably picture a smoky back room where you're arm-twisting politicians. But how close is that to reality? You know, what is it that you do for your clients, and how do you spend most of your time?
Well, I agree with you. And I think my parents are still trying to figure out what it is that I do for a living so that they could explain it to their friends. But there's no more smoky back rooms anymore. I jokingly say that I really just sit in a lot of conference committees and a lot of committee hearings. But we are there at the Statehouse day in and day out, from the morning until late in the evening, sitting in committees, meeting with legislators, meeting with different interest groups, trying to pass good public policy for the state of Indiana.
So that's during session, but really the session's only a couple months of the year. What do you do for your clients outside of session the rest of the year?
We do podcasts, actually. In all seriousness,
Thank you.
You're welcome. In all seriousness, this is where the sausage is made. This is where we turn ideas and concepts and start building coalitions and working with legislators to turn those concepts and ideas into public policy, trying to get a lot of the work done before session starts, before we're in the pressure cooker of that short and condensed time frame, to try to get things down on paper and garner support before the session even starts.
Okay. So the outside of session time is just as important, if not more important.
Absolutely.
So that helps clear up what lobbyists actually do. But the other thing that people sometimes forget is that the Statehouse isn't just an institution, right? It's full of people. legislators, staffers, lobbyists, everyone's working long hours, often sleep deprived, trying to grab dinner out of a vending machine in between meetings and juggling family life. I imagine that environment produces some memorable moments. Do any funny or tense or even awkward moments stand out to you at the Statehouse?
Every day. Every day. There are funny, tense, stressful moments. One I thought that I would share today actually involves Aspire Johnson County. 5 years ago, we were really in the midst of COVID, and there was legislation that was moving through the process that would prevent businesses from instituting a mandatory vaccine requirement in order to, for their employees. And businesses, including Aspire Johnson County, hired me to go in and say businesses need to make the best decisions for their community, for their employees, for the work that they do. We want the government to stay out of it. So I testified and we were able to make sure that that bill didn't pass. But my testimony was actually picked up by a local news station, and the marquee below my testimony on the news said, "A big deal about a little prig." And just a full-on picture of me. And I was pretty mortified. I have a really good sense of humor, and I can roll with the punches and a pretty thick skin. But I thought, oh, my God, my parents are going to see this.
Were your parents watching that one?
And if you don't have the volume up, they're going to really wonder what it is that I do. So that was just kind of a funny, awkward moment that I did have some words with the news producer afterwards. So
is it intimidating being there? You're tired, everybody's stressed or frustrated or angry, or they're trying to push their agenda. I mean, have you gotten reprimanded, or did anybody make it awkward or intense for you when you testified?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody... I believe that everybody comes from a really good place.
Yeah.
I think it's Speaker Todd Houston says that we have 150, members of the Indiana General Assembly with 150 good ideas of how to make Indiana a better place to work, live, and grow. And so, but tempers flare. I have gotten yelled at quite a few times at the Statehouse, and all 4'11" of me will stand up and say, "You can talk to me in a normal tone of voice. If you're going to act like a child, I can talk to you like a child. But why don't we sit down and really just kind of discuss this and why this is important to you and why this is important to my clients?" But all in all, it's usually there's a lot of mutual respect, and we try to come to a place of understanding.
So, these stories remind us that the Statehouse is full of real people, but outside the building, when we're talking with business leaders, we often hear, "I don't like politics, so I'm just going to tune out the legislative session." I'm sure you hear this too. What do you say when someone says they just don't like politics, but yet they're trying to run a business or an organization that's affected by policy?
So I'm going to quote former Governor Mitch Daniels, that good politics leads to good policy. And, I think what people say when they say those types of things, I don't like politics, is maybe they don't like the social policies, right? Maybe they feel like we spend too much time on abortion or guns or alcohol policy or gaming. They don't want to be involved in some of those social policies. But those social policies, there's so many other policies around that affect their taxes, the way that they run their business, regulation, et cetera. And so, I would push back and say that it's important to get really strong business-minded legislators elected to the Statehouse so that they can create good public policy for businesses across the state. And I get that, there's a lot of the things that are in the news are never the things, they don't talk about it. This is a great tax policy. It's boring. It doesn't have the pizzazz or sexiness as some of the other ones when they're talking about immigration or ICE or things like that. And often they're complicated issues. I would suggest you turn off the news and really kind of do some investigating of your own and trying to learn what some of these policies are, because it's going to impact your business and it's going to impact your bottom line.
So we should make TikTok videos about tax policy?
I don't know that I would say that. But I think it's important to learn these things, but it may just not always be the sexy, flash on the front of the news.
Yeah. And it's another reason that chambers of commerce and business groups should stay involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Indiana currently has a Republican supermajority in both chambers of the General Assembly, the House and the Senate. And from the outside, again, people assume that means that every bill is political, right? We're shaping policy just by the politics. But from your experience, how much do partisan politics really shape the policy-making process at the State House?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because I was with some legislators late last week and heard some really interesting statistics about this past legislative session that just wrapped up at the end of February, that 90% of the bills that passed in 2026 had bipartisan support. Now, that may only be one, right, from the opposing party, but 90% of all the bills that passed this year had bipartisan support. Yeah. 50% of those 90% were unanimous.
Oh, my gosh.
So it's really, again, I feel like sometimes the media likes to play this up, that there's all of this drama and frustration and intrigue that, the supermajorities are bullying their way. But really, that's not actually the case. And there are some issues that are really almost nonpartisan, that I have to work just as hard to get Republican votes as I have to get Democrat votes to get the bills across the line.
Well, that's a great point. What might have been an issue this last session where a policy issue that wasn't partisan and lawmakers were just trying to solve a problem?
Right. So 2 years ago, we passed a cell phone ban in K-12 schools, but there were some loopholes in there. We allowed students to have their cell phones during passing periods and during lunch. And there was a push this session that I worked on to try to tighten up those loopholes, to say that we're not going to have cell phones from what they called bell to bell. It was a bell to bell legislation. So they wouldn't be able to have it during passing periods, and they wouldn't have it during the lunch period. And studies have shown that the distraction that these phones have, it's really hard to get the kids to get back to focused. I read a statistic that for every text message that some child reads, it takes them 20 minutes to get their brain fully functioning on the work that they're supposed to be doing. And I don't know about you, but it's not just one text message, right? It's multiple,
right.
And social media and all of that. So, but this was a bill that we had a lot of bipartisan support, but there was also bipartisan opposition. There were some parents that were legislators that said, I really like being able to tell Johnny that volleyball practice is canceled and he needs to ride the bus home without having to go to the office and things like that. And I want, for safety reasons, for them to have their phone on their person, on their body. So I had to work really hard across party lines. It didn't really matter. It wasn't a Republican issue or a conservative issue. It wasn't a Democrat or a liberal issue. It was just trying to protect kids and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing at school. Now, my 14-year-old will tell you that I am officially grounded in the house because of working on this legislation. So I'm in hot water at home.
That's a constituency that you didn't realize you had to work, huh?
Oh, I realized it, but that constituency doesn't pay the mortgage. So
okay, we've talked about how many policy debates the State House aren't really political as people might assume, but we're going to flip this upside down. That wasn't really the story this year, was it? And so for our listeners here, I'm getting ready to use the word session. I'm going to use it in air quotes. So the 2026 legislative session technically started back in December, didn't it?
It did. Every session has its own personality. This one was no different. I am never bored in this job. I've worked very short sessions. My very first session back in 2000 ended on February 22nd. That's the second shortest session of in history of Indiana, or at least in modern day Indiana. But this one was very different because we had a push from the White House and from the president himself to do mid-cycle redistricting. And so we went back in for 2 weeks in December. But just to add to that, it wasn't just to deal with mid-cycle redistricting. We also could deal with any other issue. So that cell phone bill was also started and had a hearing in December.
Wow.
So we had to really get our acts together very quickly because we're used to having November and December getting ready and prepared. And all of a sudden it was just like, it's go time.
Right. And so that was that wasn't a policy issue driving the session, right? The dynamics under that were politics, right?
I think people could say it either way.
Yeah.
I think it could say it either way because I think, again, politics makes policy, policy makes politics.
Mm-hmm.
And people say that if we have the right people, I put in air quotes here, in place, that would help deliver better policy for the country.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of both in there.
Yeah. And these fights, these fights don't just stay inside the Statehouse, do they? How is this redistricting issue now spilling over into the primaries and campaign politics all around Indiana?
Well, it's definitely here, and it's definitely impacting. I think the Senate Republicans and only half of the Senate are up every they're up every 4 years. So we only have half of them, and 18 have contested primaries. So, I think usually they have 3 or 4 very serious ones. Every election cycle, we have 18 just now in the Senate. So we are seeing that trickle down. How that's going to turn out, I don't know, but it will be interesting to see how this all plays out in the next 6 weeks.
So why should business leaders pay attention to that dynamic and what's happening?
Because there may be legislators that are really business-minded, that are voting and creating good public policy for you, that might get kicked out and replaced by someone who's not business-minded. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to do your homework and do your research and see which type of person you want representing you at the Statehouse.
Great advice. So, Caryl, you said you've had your firm for, 8 years now, and I think we've worked with you almost every year. But it seems like every session keeps getting described as historic, unprecedented, uncharted territory. Setting aside the pandemic years, what is driving this new normal? Why does the tone, the pace, the dynamic, the agendas feel so different compared to earlier in your career?
I don't know that I know the right answer to that question. I just, like I said before, I think every session has its own personality. I jokingly say I have a legislative bingo card, and there are all new squares every year that I never thought I would fill or see something. You get clients' money in the budget back in 2025, and then we have such a budget shortfall that everything new money gets ripped right back out. So you've been doing all this work for a year, and in a blink of an eye, all that money is gone. And so, this session, we had the shortened condensed session that was on speed, that started with redistricting and ended with, I think we passed just as many bills as we do during a long session, and really some big, meaty issues that we worked on.
Township merging and reformation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, hey, let's just do before we wrap up, couple quick questions. We're going to do a lightning round, just quick reactions here.
Sure.
So, okay, we talked about the legislative session, long days and nights. So, Caryl, where is the best quick food near the Statehouse?
So most of the time we're in the snack shack in the basement of the Statehouse getting a hot dog and a bag of chips, if I'm being really honest. But if I do get a chance to go get a little bit of vitamin D on my face, and we're usually at Cafe Patachou right across the street. So we're very fortunate to have them. Now, unfortunately, they close, I think, at 2:00. So, that doesn't help us late at night.
No. Hot dogs at dinner.
Absolutely.
So, okay, who has the toughest or most underrated job at the Statehouse that people don't realize?
100% the Legislative Services Agency attorneys. These are nonpartisan attorneys that draft every single bill, every single amendment, every conference committee report. I don't think they sleep during the legislative session and the gear up to the legislative session. And they just have no opinion on these bills. They can say, I want to write a crazy bill about fireworks, and they draft it according to, where it might fit into state law. And so I think they're underrated, undervalued, underappreciated, and underpaid because they really do some significant work during the legislative session.
So we're going to send flowers.
Yes.
Most common thing people get wrong about lobbyists?
I think people often think that I have an opinion on every single thing that I work on. I'm not paid to have an opinion. I'm paid to promote the opinion of the clients that I represent. And so I always kind of get a kick when people are like, okay, but like if you weren't representing a client, like how do you really feel about an issue? And I kind of course I have my own personal thoughts and things. I live this on a day-to-day basis, but that's buried pretty way down. And so I tend to, just try to do the best job that I can for my clients and make sure that we're trying to make good public policy for them.
All right. Well, let's end on some positive notes here. Despite all the challenges, the changes we've seen, what still works well at the Indiana Statehouse?
Again, I'll go back to what Speaker Houston says. We've got 150 different people coming from all different walks of life, from all different corners of the state that really just want to do good things for our state of Indiana. And when you think about that, that kind of makes some warm fuzzies in your heart, because they really do. They just all come from different backgrounds and different places and different communities in which they serve. And so part of the thing that I love doing the most is outside of session, I go to these different towns and I get a better understanding of why these legislators say the things that they say, vote the way that they vote, because where I live is very different from where other legislators live, and we've lived different lives. And so I really enjoy kind of the humanistic aspect of that.
That's neat. Well, that kind of answers my final question personally. After all the years you've been doing this, what do you still love about the work?
I am never bored. I am never bored. I'm constantly learning. I'm really hired not because I may be an in-depth policy wonk on a certain issue. I'm hired for access. I'm hired for knowing and understanding how to get a bill across the finish line or to kill bad public policy. And for the relationships that I've developed over the past 25 plus years. But I learn about different public policy every day. People say, we need you to pass this complicated banking issue. I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to learn it and I'm going to understand it, and then I'm going to be able to teach it to other people. And so I always say I will be done when I'm done learning. And so I haven't hit that benchmark yet.
That's amazing. So you still look forward to that brand new bingo card every year?
I do.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. The legislative session, it may only last a couple of months each year, but clearly, as we've discussed, the policies debated at the Statehouse shape the environment that every Indiana business operates in. So, Caryl, thank you for helping us better understand how the process works, for giving us a little bit of perspective on this year's unusually eventful session. I want to, again, thank our sponsors for making this conversation possible. Aspire Johnson County's Business Insider podcast is presented by Citizens Bank. And today's episode sponsor is Community Hospital South. That's it for this episode of Johnson County Business Insider. I'm your host, Christian Maslowski. Join us next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Citizens Bank. Citizens Bank, serving South Central Indiana since 1931. Building strong communities one relationship at a time. Learn more at citizens-banking.com.